My adjectives are handsome and brilliant.
No shot! You have chosen those adjectives. Why would you defeat your own argument? What are you doing, Matt? You are choosing those for your adjectives, which is contrary to what you said before. Given what I've heard from Matt Walsh and the actual argument of like, oh, you don't even get to choose your adjectives. It's foolish. It's completely wrong. We have apparently been blessed with a Dr. Phil video, the philosopher of our time, learning about and hosting a debate on both sides of the gender pronoun debate. And, you know, there are certainly multiple sides to the gender pronoun debate, but only few of those sides are correct and legitimate and cohesive and logically consistent. That would be my side of things, because I'm always right. Anyway, we've got on apparently some trans activists and also Matt Walsh. I don't know why Matt Walsh is there, because from what I've seen of his anti-trans content, he is not the best transphobe out there. He is not even close to the most rhetorically efficient and effective transphobe out there. He's just not. He's really bad at countering the trans agenda and trans ideology. He's incredibly bad at doing so, to the point where a bimbo like me can easily debunk and shit on him for it. So I hope to do this again. So let's find out what's up from the authoritative source, Dr. Phil. Let's go.
I'm Addison.
And I'm Ethan.
We've been together for about
5 years.
And
Been
married.
married for 3 years.
I use they, them pronouns.
So can I just say,
being non-binary just means that
I appreciate the fact that this person seems to present in a very feminine capacity, but also keeps the facial hair. It's not for me, just because I don't like facial hair in general, but I appreciate that they do both and that they are seemingly excited about and enjoy very much their facial hair. That is very cool to me. I appreciate that.
I just don't identify with the gender I was assigned at birth, and I don't identify exclusively with being a man or a woman. I'm something in between, outside of that binary.
My pronouns are he or they. I also identify as a non-binary. To me, being a non-binary means having the sense of freedom to explore my gender in whichever way I want. I don't have to perform or pretend to be someone I'm not. I can be my authentic self.
It's really important for us to share more information with people, because people are curious, they want to understand, but sometimes they don't always have the opportunities to do that.
And you know what's really funny about this? So these are two non-binary people. We don't know much about their backstory in regards to, are they some flavor of trans or not? There was the one beach photo of this person who it seems like they've got scars from top surgery. That being said, this is like a really interesting and funny juxtaposition to the right-wing transphobic talking point that, oh, trans women or trans people are always trying to aggress on, you know, real women. Why don't they ever date other trans women? Blah, 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 blah. Why don't they stick to their own? That talking point. We've got an example right here where we've got two non-binary people who are dating each other or are married or whatever else. And it happens all the time. If you ever hear that talking point, you're talking to somebody who has literally no idea what they're talking about when it comes to trans people, because trans people, especially trans women, are perhaps even more likely to look for other trans women because they know it's safer to do so. Because a lot of the time, especially for trans femme people, trans women, if you're going out into the dating marketplace and you end up finding somebody who is cis, especially a cis man, and they find out you're trans, you can end up in a unsafe position where you might be assaulted, you might be, you know, even killed. So out of necessity and out of safety, a lot of trans femmes especially will look for other trans people to date. The whole idea that trans people are only ever going after cis people, why don't they stick to their own, like the TERFs like to say, etc., is just bullshit.
This is a hot topic.
Yes.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is it a good thing?
I guess because it creates dialogue and it invites conversation to learn about other people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are really confused about gender identity in these times, and it's good for us to have these conversations so people open their minds and relearn and unlearn to what we've been taught.
Right.
So I don't know much about Addison, but the mere fact that they present in a fairly feminine way but keep their beard is, I think, actually like optically really good. It's actually kind of smart, especially if you're doing this kind of advocacy, because it immediately makes people question their preconceived notions about a variety of different things. How feminine people are supposed to look, how masculine people are supposed to look, on whose bodies do beards belong. It confuses people immediately when they see it, and in the proper context could potentially lead to opening up certain avenues of advocacy and rhetoric to try try to steer people away from their preconceived notions of how these things are supposed to be. I actually like that a lot. It is an effective tool in that way, I think, if used well. It's partially, that also kind of partially applies to me too, where currently I still dress fairly femininely, right? Like I wear skin-tight clothing, I wear leggings, I wear body-conforming clothing to show off my curves, and I'm wearing like eyeliner now. I dress very femininely, I have long hair, but my personality is still fairly masculine. The way that I speak and the depth of my voice is not expected ever anytime I talk. My personality, my demeanor, and the way that I carry myself is also fairly masculine, which introduces a lot of confusion for people, and I can use that to try to introduce people to new, more progressive concepts in regards to gender identity, gender expression, and all this kind of thing.
People think gender pronouns are exclusive to the LGBTQ plus community, but that's a misconception, true?
Yeah. Well, everybody has pronouns. Like,
no! God damn it, are you telling me I got pronouns? So you are fucking lying to me, you libtard. I ain't got no pronouns. They call me by my name. They never use pronouns for me. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I have never used pronouns. Of course, you would have long hair and a beard and have pronouns, but me, no siree, you don't know shit.
I use they and them as my pronouns. We all may have a certain gender pronoun too, but I think it's important for people to understand that for trans and non-binary people, we often change our pronouns to reflect who we are when we come out and be who we are.
True. And not only does Addison use they and them pronouns, and that's a very strict set of pronouns that they want to use, but literally everybody uses they and them pronouns. So Addison uses explicitly they and them pronouns, and those are the pronouns that you should only use when referencing Addison, the person. However, let's say Dr. Phil has left his wallet somewhere, okay? And then the stagehand picks up the wallet and is like, whose wallet is this? The other stagehand opens it, looks at the ID, inspects it, and is like, oh, that's theirs, and points at Dr. Phil. They and them are used for people all the time, even if they don't explicitly use those pronouns only.
How do you explain the difference between sex and gender?
I consider sex to be our biological makeup. Our chromosomes or hormones, our genitals is a biological makeup. But our gender is more of an internal sense. So think of it like this. Sex is what's between the legs, and gender is what's between the ears, right? It's how we see ourselves.
That's one simplified way to look at it. The way I choose to look at it is that if you're trying to tell me as a transphobe, as a right-winger, that sex and gender are the same thing, well then I guess I had gender with your mother last night. I think that's the ultimate defeater for that that line of thought. But that being said, I don't know that I like that analogy too much, because like the gender is what's between your legs. That's like a transphobic opinion a lot of the time. But I don't think it's a bad analogy, especially not for like normies, which if you're on Dr. Phil's show, you are talking to normies. But like when you go a little bit further into it, I don't know if it's the best analogy. Mostly because of the conflation between sex and gender. Saying that is like, I don't know that that's the best example.
And that's something somebody can't know. Gender is something somebody can't know just by looking at somebody.
Nope, yeah. Because everyone is going to present and express themselves in a different way. I know, it's very confusing.
And in that way, sex is not something you can know simply by looking at someone. Like, if you look at Blair White, you know, the Pope of the trans women, if you look at her and you know nothing about who the person is, you just see a woman because she presents as society understands women to look like. But take Blair White out of the equation and the fact that she is a trans woman. Let's remove Blair White entirely from the conversation, actually. Let's say we find a man and they look like this. Immediately, you're gonna assume they're a woman, but there's no way for you to possibly know. So you can't possibly, just by looking at someone, know either their sex or gender identity unless you're doing what the right wing wants to do, which is genital inspections in the bathroom. But I don't support that because that's an infringement on personal and individual liberty.
Right? Everyone's like, what is going on? But it's really, you know, about us breaking that assumption that we can tell someone's identity, someone's story, their pronouns, even their name, just based on how they look, right?
Yeah. And so how does someone ask? How does somebody clarify that? Ethan, how would you, what's the best way? What's the most comfortable way?
I think for me, to create a safe space for people to share their pronouns, I will say, hi, my name is Ethan. I use he or they pronouns. What about you?
I think it's really...
It makes a lot of sense to me. I think that's probably the best way to do it, especially because asking for somebody's pronouns is not a very normalized thing to do. So the best way to introduce the idea of people telling other people their pronouns is when you introduce yourself, like Ethan says, give the person your name and then also tell them the pronouns you use. And that will invite the other person to do the same, to give their name and then the pronouns they use. Even if they don't expect to do it, they could probably just be like, oh, like even if they're confused and are unaware of why you're telling them that your pronouns, they just might say he, him, because that's what they hear all the time and that's what they go by, whether it's like a thing they've thought about a lot or not. And if not, then at least they know your pronouns.
But for so many people who are cisgender, meaning that you do identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth, you're not transgender or not non-binary.
TERFs are gonna
I
get
think
mad
a lot
at
of
this
people don't even question their pronouns because we already use them and it's already assumed correctly. But for so many trans and non-binary people, that isn't often assumed correctly. So we need to take the time to get to know people.
Cisgender, it says adjective...
AKA sissies, but with a C.
...that describes a person whose gender identity matches or aligns with the gender he or she was assigned at birth. Now, this would be what has been traditional for centuries, right?
Yeah, being a cisgender person is what's considered normal. I don't think Dr. Phil wanted to use the word normal there. That's why I said traditional. But it is what is considered normal in society currently. We're currently, through advocating for trans liberation, etc., we're breaking down a lot of the preconceived notions that have been built into society, but that is what is considered normal.
Why does it need a term?
You know, if we don't
Well, it needs a term to differentiate it from other identities that people use. So cisgender exists, it is the default. The reason why the word is used is because transgender and non-binary and other kinds of gender identities like that are now more and more commonplace as more and more people are comfortable coming out as being whatever, you know, denomination. The reason why the term is necessary is because of that, where previously it hasn't been necessary, because previously non-cis people were not really taken seriously.
Use that term, then we end up saying maybe real men or normal men or regular men, right? Or we just say men, and then we say maybe transgender men, right? And the thing is that we need to realize that trans women are women.
True.
Trans men are men too.
True.
And so we just want to have a term for that privilege, that assumption that your gender identity is going to match the one that you were assigned at birth.
I don't know that I like that ending, like that privilege. It is certainly a privileged position to be cis, but I don't know that it's a privileged position in the way that you would usually hear that term be used. I think that my explanation of it might be a little bit better, but I don't know. Like I say, Addison and Ethan are trying to interface with normies on the Dr. Phil program right now who are watching, like wine moms and the older demographic who are watching Dr. Phil. So it all depends on your rhetoric, I guess, if you're going to be able to reach that demographic or not.
The transgender adjective describes a person whose gender identity does not match or align with the gender they were assigned at birth. And then non-binary describes a person whose gender identity does not fit into the traditional binary of man or woman. And that term can be abbreviated to, and how do you pronounce that?
NB.
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 Yeah. NB, like non-binary. NB.
Explain that.
For transgender people, we are assigned a sex at birth. And when we grow up, you know, when there's a mismatch of how we view ourselves and how society views us, then we can choose to, you know, either medically transition or just socially transition or both.
My name is Matt.
For those of you who don't know, now that this fucking ghoul is on my screen, medically transitioning includes things like going on hormones, having gender or sexual confirmation surgeries, stuff like that. Whereas socially transitioning is usually just like base level aesthetics, your voice, how you look and dress, how other people around you will assume you to be, and does not include the medical stuff like hormones and surgeries and stuff like that. But now this absolute ghoul is here, and we covered Matt Walsh's reaction to Samantha Lux's reaction to Matt Walsh's anti-trans walrus book. So of course, as the, I guess, anointed pope of the transphobes, Matt Walsh is now on Dr. Phil to spew more scientifically inaccurate transphobic pablum for, unfortunately, a demographic that might be more likely to align with his ideology than Ethan or Addison's, because this is Dr. Phil.
Matt Walsh, and I've written a book called Johnny the Walrus. This book
Why is Walsh even there? To promote his book, to get more money from book sales. That's it.
he identifies as a walrus, And his mom's a little silly. She takes it seriously and thinks he really is a walrus. So she went on her phone, and there are people telling her that this isn't pretend. He's really a walrus. And his mother takes him to the doctor to have him surgically transitioned and gets him walrus hormone pills, and then eventually tries to drop him off at a zoo to live with other walruses. Not only topping the Amazon charts, my book has taken the world by storm.
You're saying
Has
that...
it really, though? By the way, just so you know, it seems to be incredibly easy, depending on the kind of connections you have, to get a #1 best-selling book. There are actually think tanks out there that will buy, like, bulk amounts of copies of the book, which contribute to the amount of sales that you get, even if those books literally just, like, collect dust in a basement somewhere. It's not an indicator of how much people actually care about the book. It literally just indicates the amount of sales, and that can be gamed very easily.
There should be no construct of gender, just sex. You're either male or female.
Right.
And someone feeling in a mental, emotional way that they don't identify with the sex that they have been biologically created as and assigned at birth based on their genitalia.
I appreciate Dr. Phil trying his best to tiptoe through the window of trans and gender identity topics. It does seem to be that he's putting forth a good faith effort to try to understand either side, especially the pro-trans side, because that's the underrepresented side. It seems like he's trying, and that's all I can ask for, really.
If they don't feel that way, that there's no construct that describes that, experiences that.
Well, that's got nothing to do with the reality. So you can feel however you want. I mean, I could sit here and say that I feel like a tomato plant, but that doesn't mean that I'm actually in those things. So
it's literally the one joke. It's the attack helicopter. This is not even a good argumentative tactic. It's not even good rhetoric. It's so tired. And Matt Walsh is up here as the Pope of the transphobes, delivering this.
Your self-perception, you can have whatever self-perception you want, but you can't expect me to take part in that self-perception or to take part in this kind of charade, this theatrical production. You don't get your own pronouns, just like you don't get your own prepositions or your own adjectives.
Wait, why? What? How do you not get your own adjectives? So, like, let's take, for instance, a lumberjack. The stereotypical example of a lumberjack, okay? If this dude is considered buff, gruff, rough, and tumble, those are all adjectives used to describe this person. However, if they shaved their beard, if they put more care into trying to look more feminine, their adjectives then change to being not gruff, rough, and tumble, but rather being soft, feminine, pretty, or other adjectives that more describe the aesthetic choices of the person. So, Matt Walsh currently is seen by society to be more masculine somehow, and it's because of the beard. But as soon as you shave that beard off and reveal the incel chin underneath, he's no longer seen as masculine. That's the only shred of masculinity Matt Walsh has. As soon as that thing is gone, his adjectives turn into soy boy, incel, former school shoot, you know, those kinds of adjectives start to apply to him more. So the idea that you don't have your own adjectives is just completely incorrect. I don't know how you could use this example. And that's the same for pronouns. Your pronouns correlate to the way that you want to be referred to, and often, they don't have to, but often they also correlate to your aesthetic presentation. You get to choose your own pronouns too.
My adjectives are handsome and brilliant, and whenever you're talking about—
No shot! You have chosen those adjectives. Why would you defeat your own argument? What are you doing, Matt? All right, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I can understand why people might think Matt Walsh is attractive or handsome, but not everybody does. You are choosing those for your adjectives currently, which is contrary to what you said before. Given what I've heard from Matt Walsh and the actual argument of like, oh, you don't even get to choose your adjectives. It's foolish. It's completely wrong.
About me, you have to describe me as handsome and brilliant because that's how I identify. Makes no sense. You don't get your own pronouns. That's grammar. That's language.
But it's still assumed for you. There are people with deteriorating eyesight who might actually find Matt Walsh attractive, handsome, brilliant, whatever, and you don't have a say in that, Matt Walsh. That's just assumed. So your adjectives change whether you like it or not. So there's no reason why you can't just choose them. If you, Matt Walsh, decide that you think you are handsome and you use those adjectives to describe yourself, you have chosen your adjectives, and I don't think anybody would have an issue with that outside of the fact that they might disagree with your assessment. But that doesn't invalidate your own self-perception.
Makes no sense. You don't get your own pronouns. That's grammar. That's language.
So you think it's a delusion? Someone is self-delusional.
Yeah, I think it's delusion. It could be mental illness. It could be it's a lot of different things. So
it could be mental illness. More projection from Matt Walsh, who does not understand basic biology that you could learn literally in grade school. This guy is calling other people delusional and mentally ill. I don't know. I mean, the people with the mental deficiency seem to be the people that don't understand basic biology and the differences between sex and gender and how they manifest in society.
When a 4-year-old boy comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm a girl," here's a good follow-up question. What is a girl? Ask him what he means by that. What do you mean by girl? And when you ask him that, here's what he'll tell you. He will tell you what he really means is that he wants to do some of the things that girls do, like play with the dollhouse, or you know, he likes the color pink. That's fine, but you're still a boy.
That can be true, but what if it's not? What if as the child ages past 4 years old and these predilections for things that are considered to be more feminine, what if those things continue on? It's almost like you can go to a medical professional as long as you have access to one, and they could actually analyze and assess your child and then follow these steps throughout that child's life, see if those things continue. I'm pretty sure Matt Walsh isn't okay with cis men wearing makeup or dresses. So unless out of nowhere, Matt Walsh is suddenly pro-femboy, his argument starts to break down a little bit. Because over enough amount of time, if medical professionals and the parents notice that the child who at 4 years old said they were a girl and the themes continue to manifest, we could potentially put the child on completely reversible puberty blockers until they are assessed further, made aware what it means to be trans, what it means to have a certain gender identity, and either it turns out that they are a boy, that's how they identify, and it was a phase or whatever else, take them off the puberty blockers, and then they have a late puberty as a AMAB person. Or it turns out that that person is actually a trans woman, and the puberty blockers are now really helpful in transitioning further. They go on some sort of hormone replacement therapy, and then they have a better shot at least assimilating into society as a person who does not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Meaning that they have a better quality of life. They don't have to suffer the negative ramifications of being trans in society because of propaganda pushed by people like Matt Walsh that leads to complete overt negative consequences in society for trans people, and they end up being better off. If you want people to have the freest life possible, if you want people to have the best quality of life possible, if you care about human beings and you don't like the abuse of children, being pro-trans is the antithesis of the pro-child abuse right wing. Boys are meant to be this way, girls are meant to be that way. If my child comes to me and says that they're trans and I'm Matt Walsh, I'm gonna tell them they're a fucking idiot and that they're not, and I'm going to be verbally, mentally abusive to them in that way. The antithesis of that Matt Walsh ideology is to be pro-trans, to be educated on the topic. But Matt Walsh does not understand any of it. Ironically, he has a child's understanding of trans issues of gender identity and sex.
Well, this is one of the problems with this left-wing gender ideology, is that no one who espouses it can even tell you what these words mean. Like, what is a woman?
Well,
can you tell me what a woman is?
No, I can't. Because it's not for me to say. Womanhood looks different for everybody.
What do you define a woman as?
An adult human female.
And what does a female mean?
Well, that's
how do you define a female?
someone with female reproductive organs.
Okay.
Someone who's, you know, here's the thing, when you're female, it goes right down to your bones, your DNA. So that's why if someone dies...
Notice how he had to skip over to some other shit. He said, oh, you have female reproductive organs, and then he had to switch to something else. Pretty sure he's not too solid on this.
Okay.
We could dig up their bones 100 years from now. We have no idea what they believed in their head, but we can tell what sex they were because it's ingrained in every fiber of their being.
But does that change how that person that we dug out of this archaeological site thought of themselves and their own identity when they were alive? No. It doesn't. It's almost like there is a difference between biological sex and gender identity. Thank you very much, Matt Walsh. The idea that if we're at an archaeological dig site and we find the bones of a person who matches up with the assigned male at birth or the assigned female at birth bone structure, you know, where usually AFAB people will have wider hips or whatever to facilitate the birth of children, blah, 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 blah. If we find out more about that person past what their bones looked like, and we learn more through whatever written documents or records there might be, that person actually identified to the contrary of what their sex was, that just defeats your argument. And this has actually happened in the past. I want to find it. Vosh put a video out about, does anybody know? There was like this royalty or something that was like non-binary in their life, and the way that they went through their life was in a non-binary capacity. Oh, I found it, never mind. This is a WAPO article, which is unfortunately liberal propaganda. Mysterious 1,000-year-old remains may be of a non-binary person's, researchers say. In the grave lay a bronze-hilted sword, another long blade missing its hilt, a sheathed knife, 3 brooches, a sickle, and pieces of a skeleton nearly decomposed. The collection of items lying with the bones seemed to evade traditional Western notions of gender. The sword suggested that the person they were buried alongside might be a man, but the jewelry indicated that the body belonged to a woman. This person, dated to AD 1050 to 1300, seemed important. They were buried wearing what may have been costly animal pelts and arranged on what was once bedding that contained feathers. Much remains unknown about them. Researchers don't know whether they were a leader or warrior, what their life looked like, or how they would have identified. But according to a recent study from Finnish and German researchers, they were a male-bodied person of some wealth or importance buried in traditionally feminine dress. And that raises the questions about the fluidity of gender in early medieval Finland. Researchers say it's possible that this person was non-binary, not strictly male or female. Although much of archaeology and much of the world are still bound by binary ideas of gender, research has repeatedly shown that not everyone identifies with a rigid male-female classification. Quote, "We've always been here," author Diane E. Anderson said, "being non-binary isn't an invention of the 21st century. We may have only started using those words, but that's just putting language to an existing gender that's always been around." All of this to say that Matt Walsh is wrong, actually. But essentially, this article completely debunks the idea that just because there is a certain bone structure that seems to correlate to an AFAB or AMAB person, that has no bearing on how that person actually identified. And as a result, you would need to know more about that person's life. You would need to see written records, if any existed, about how that person conceptualized their own identity. And if you're not able to find that, then the remains don't mean anything about broader ideas of like, oh, it's always been the case that if you're born a man, you're a man, and if you're born a woman, you're a woman, and this is all new left-wing pro-trans ideology propaganda, blah, blah, blah. It's not the argument you think it is.
So I'm trying to understand. Your definition is that a woman is someone who is female, you said, right?
Correct,
Gotcha.
is
Okay.
a biological female.
So what happens if we have maybe someone who is female, identifies as a woman, right? You know, cisgender woman, right?
Okay.
As you just explained, maybe doesn't have the ability to reproduce. Maybe doesn't have those organs that you're talking about that are reproductive organs.
I have answered the question. You stood up here and said trans women are women.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean.
He's dodging the question. You didn't answer shit. You answered the question of what is a woman as biological female. Now we're trying to find out what exactly do you mean by biological female. These are easy questions to answer if you actually have some kind of understanding of what you're trying to talk about, regardless of if it's correct or not. So if you're saying that a biological female is somebody with the secondary sexual characteristics of a woman, the genitalia of a woman, you know, a uterus, the ability to reproduce, depending on where we go with the conversation, which is what Addison is trying to figure out about what you mean by biological female, much in the same way that Matt Walsh will say that the left doesn't have an answer for what a woman is, apparently Matt Walsh doesn't either, because a lot of arguments can be made contrary to the idea that women are just, you know, biological females, because then you can't really account for intersex people, because then you can't really account for women who go through menopause and are now infertile. You can't account for women who are born with genetic conditions that make them infertile, or genetic conditions that make it so that they do not have breasts or a vagina or whatever else. So it's unfortunate because it's a clever rhetorical trick to be like, oh, I've already answered the question, but you haven't answered mine yet, even though he didn't actually answer the question in a sufficient enough way, even by his own standard. But now Addison is on the back foot and has to be defensive and has to answer his question. And you could answer this question and continue on, but you would want to press further on the path that Addison was on, and now we've been deflected from it.
I cannot define because I am not
But
myself.
you used the word, so what did you mean when you said trans women are women if you don't know what it means?
Right? So here's the thing. So I do not define what a woman is because I do not identify as a woman. Womanhood is something that is an umbrella term. It includes people
That
who...
describes what?
So it's unfortunate. I don't know that Addison is a debate lord. I'm certainly not a debate lord. I'm a turn-based debate lord, and then I react to videos. Now, that being said, Matt Walsh is not an exceptional debate lord either. However, he seems to be a little bit better, at least rhetorically. I don't like this idea of like, oh, I can't define for you what a woman is because I am not a woman. Like that's kind of a weak argument, because then he could just say, well, I'm a man and I can define for you what a woman is right now. It's not really the strongest argument, and it's unfortunate. Now, it is true that woman is an umbrella term, but these answers are not very great.
People who identify as a woman.
Identify as what?
As a woman.
What is that?
was to each their own. Each woman, each man, each person is going to have a different relation with their own gender identity. And
I think one of the ways you could say this, and like I say, I'm not a debate lord, I think you could say, well, there is a difference between sex and gender, at least in Addison's case, that is my view of these things, right? So in my view, there's a difference between sex and gender. So what is a female? That's a person who is assigned female at birth. That is a person who has a certain set of chromosomes, who has a certain set of reproductive organs, and yada, yada, yada. But there's a difference between being a female and being a woman. That's the distinction. So a female might be that biological answer I just gave, but a woman is essentially whatever society deems a woman to be. Being a woman is different from being a female, and being a woman is a social construct. In a rhetorically efficient sense, especially in regards not only just with interfacing with Matt Walsh, but understanding that there are normies that are going to be watching you on this program, Dr. Phil, it's hard to do. Like, it's hard for anybody to do. So I don't know that we've been the most effective, unfortunately. I don't know if I'd be able to do any better. So it's a hard place to be.
Find it differently.
That doesn't,
and so
I'm not
trans
asking
women are women too.
Okay.
And you want to hold on.
Trans
You
women
want
are
to
women.
reduce.
What you
Listen,
won't
listen.
even tell me
You
what the
want to
word
reduce.
means, though. So
You
that's
want to
the
reduce
problem.
women. You want to reduce.
So we're just worrying about semantics. Matt Walsh's entire argument right now is semantics. Oh, you want to find this exact word. You want to give me an exact definition. Well, it's almost like there isn't an exact definition. It's almost like it varies, even for the term woman, referring to biological women in that they were born with the correct chromosomes and they have the correct reproductive organs in Matt Walsh's sense for what a female is. There is not a strict definition because depending on where you go, it changes, even if it's just in reference to AFAB people. So it's an impossible question to answer if you actually have the understanding and the education to know that it's not as rigid as Matt Walsh wants to force it to be.
Men down to maybe just their genetics, our genitals, our chromosomes, right? That's what you're saying.
What you want to do is
that's what
you want to do is appropriate women. You want to appropriate womanhood,
okay,
and turn it into basically a costume that can be worn.
Womanhood is already a costume that can be worn because it's different than being a female, because sex and gender are different. It's just the same tired talking points all the time and delivered through Matt Walsh's soy mouth. It's boring, it's tired, but unfortunately it's a conversation that has to be had because trans people are the minority group that is seen by society as being more okay to shit on. Unfortunately, they are the next up now that, you know, homophobia was made illegal when Barack Obama and the Supreme Court made gay marriage legal. So now trans people are the next on the chopping block. It's unfortunate, but that is quite literally why a lot of these pundits are focusing in on trans issues. It's because of the internalized transphobia that a lot of people in society have. It is easier to be transphobic and not get canceled, quote unquote, for it, not get TOS'd for it and kicked off of certain platforms. That's the primary reason why a lot of right-wingers are very excited to talk about it when they don't actually care about it that much. There's literally no negative consequence to understanding the difference between sex and gender and allowing for people to identify the way they want to. There is no actual statistical studied negative consequence for that. Now, you could be like, oh, 40%, 40%. Yeah, the reason why there is a higher chance of suicidality in trans people is because society pushes back against them negatively, because their family structure pushes back against them negatively. We can solve for the 40% by better educating people, by making it so that with that better education, they are not absolutely fucking shitty to those trans people to the point where those trans people do the most drastic thing possible and even think about taking their own lives. 40% is not an intrinsic thing to trans people. 40% is a product of bigotry pushed on them by the people around them who are uneducated, who do not know. So we educate those people, the number goes down. And I only bring that up because that's going to be the immediate counter argument to what I've said about how affirming trans identity has literally no negatives. It'll be the 40% meme, but it's literally because of people like Matt Walsh that the 40% meme is a thing that is even referenced.
Going on in schoolrooms across the country.
The entire gender pronoun situation.
I don't know that I care about the rest of
Makes me feel very
this.
upset.
I cared about the actual debate and the Matt Walsh and Addison Ethan portions, so I think we'll cut it there. But let's see what's up in Dr. Phil's comments. Person with a check mark, oh boy. That means their opinion must be correct, right? Dude, they can't even describe what they think a woman is. If a woman can quote-unquote mean anything, then it essentially means nothing at all. Matt is 100% right. Pronouns don't belong to you. It's English language with clear definition. Yeah, you've got a brain disease. You've got a brain worm that makes it impossible for you to understand nuance in any situation. And you can only think in strict binaries of what you think you're supposed to believe. And you don't even actually believe this through your own soul searching. I guarantee the majority of the people with this take just had this ideology forced upon them by people like Matt Walsh or the people that came before him. There is a difference between being a female and being a woman. The conflation of the two is a product of lack of education on the topic, which these people are clearly exhibiting. Matt dominated this debate. He was speaking truth to power. What do you mean truth to power? What, the almighty trans people, the trans, ideology that is so powerful. Trans people are some of the most marginalized people in our society currently, especially trans people of color. What are you talking about? But it's just the Umberto Eco Fash meme, the enemy is both all powerful and also incredibly weak and feeble, right? They should admit they don't know what a woman is. I do think that was a rhetorical misstep. They needed to be clear on the difference between gender and sex, and they tried to do that when asking Matt Walsh further questions about what is a female, keep going on that description. But unfortunately, Matt Walsh was able to deflect away from that conversation because he's a coward and can't actually answer the questions in a meaningful way that debunks the opposite points. But, Also, words mean whatever we want them to mean. Words literally don't have any meaning until humans apply meaning to them by inventing them. Turning woman to a costume, nailed it. You're almost there, my friend. You're almost there. You almost understand what gender identity is. You're so close. Matt Walsh actually accurately identified what gender identity is and how it's different than biological sex. But he thinks he's using it to counter the trans talking points. But it's literally the trans talking point. Oh, God. But like I say, not only is this probably brigaded by Matt's audience, because there is a good reason to do that, if you're Matt's audience. This is the Dr. Phil program. It's got 6 million subs. It's a very popular TV show for a while. The primary demographic of Dr. Phil watchers are usually older. I would imagine it skews older. So a lot of those people are going to have a lot of internalized transphobia, a lot of misunderstandings about sex and gender, a lack of education, and as a result, are going to be more likely to agree with Matt Walsh. So flooding the comments, like choking on Matt's dick, is actually a good play. And you would hope that there would be more pro-trans comments in here, but I'm not seeing literally any of them. But they do seem like bot comments. Like, a lot of these are literally the same exact comment over and over. And that's not to say that they all have to be different, but, like, they're all roughly the same. Like, Matt is 100% correct, Matt won, and then the same tired NPC talking point about trans people. Very silly. Very, very silly. Anyway, that was fun. I can't do it. Chat, I'm fucked up. The nepotistic and rigged nature of this CONURE callout, it's eating away at me the guilt of rigging this CONURE callout. I just can't do it. This video's CONURE callout is the editor of this channel, High Progressive. Many people have been wondering, are these random drawings? Like, are they rigged? Is it nepotism? Is nepotism actually a problem in real life, but also in online spaces and communities? I've thought about this quite a bit myself, and all I can really say is, with certainty, don't ask questions you're not prepared to handle the answers to. If you'd like to be the next CONURE callout, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter, @CONURECC, retweet my video links when they go live, same as it always is. Remember to subscribe to the channel, put all notifications on when you hit the bell. Remember to leave a like if you like, comment something righteous in its affirmation and validation of trans people down below, and do whatever it is you're gonna do after this, because I'm not your mom or your dad. Goodbye.